The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club's ballroom, sending crystal fragments scattering like fallen stars across the polished surface. In the stunned silence that followed, Patricia Whitmore's voice cut through the air with surgical precision, each word dripping with venom she had carefully cultivated for 3 years. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. FBI? Don't make me laugh. That pathetic little nobody couldn't catch a cold, let alone a criminal. The woman standing before her, still holding the badge that had tumbled from her purse during the confrontation, felt every eye in the room burning into her soul. For 3 long years, she had endured the whispers, the condescending smiles, the carefully orchestrated campaign designed to make her feel like an intruder in her own life. But this moment, this public humiliation in front of Charleston's social elite, would be Patricia Whitmore's final mistake, because Special Agent Maya Castellanos had spent the last 18 months building an airtight case against the very people sipping champagne and judging her in this room. And her mother-in-law had just confessed to obstruction of justice in front of 40 witnesses. But let's go back to where it all began, in the suffocating perfection of suburbia, where appearances mattered more than truth and social standing. Was the only currency that counted. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club's ballroom, sending crystal fragments scattering like fallen stars across the polished surface. In the stunned silence that followed, Patricia Whitmore's voice cut through the air with surgical precision, each word dripping with venom she had carefully cultivated for 3 years. FBI? Don't make me laugh. That pathetic little nobody couldn't catch a cold, let alone a criminal. The woman standing before her, still holding the badge that had tumbled from her purse during the confrontation, felt every eye in the room burning into her soul. For 3 long years, she had endured the whispers, the condescending smiles, the carefully orchestrated campaign designed to make her feel like an intruder in her own life. But this moment, this public humiliation in front of Charleston's social elite, would be Patricia Whitmore's final mistake, because Special Agent Maya Castellanos had spent the last 18 months building an airtight case against the very people sipping champagne and judging her in this room. And her mother-in-law had just confessed to obstruction of justice in front of 40 witnesses. But let's go back to where it all began, in the suffocating perfection of suburbia, where appearances mattered more than truth and social standing. Was the only currency that counted. The Whitmore family estate sprawled across 5 manicured acres in Charleston's most exclusive neighborhood, where old money whispered its secrets behind wrought iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. The house itself was a testament to generational wealth, a Georgian colonial that had been featured in Southern Living magazine twice and served as the backdrop for charity galas that raised more money for tax deductions than actual causes. Maya Castellanos had first glimpsed this world 3.5 years ago when she'd met David Whitmore at a coffee shop near the University of South Carolina. She had been working undercover as a graduate student, investigating a complex money laundering operation that had tentacles reaching into Charleston's most respected institutions. He had been finishing his MBA, completely unaware that the quiet, studious woman who'd asked to share his table would eventually become both his wife and the architect of his mother's downfall. Their courtship had been swift and genuine, at least on David's part. Maya found herself caught between 2 worlds, her professional duty and the unexpected warmth of falling in love with a man who saw past the carefully constructed facade she'd built for her cover. David was everything her target profile had suggested. He would be intelligent, idealistic, and completely removed from his family's darker financial dealings. He worked at a non-profit focused on educational reform, lived in a modest apartment despite his trust fund, and had the kind of earnest passion for social justice that made Maya's deception feel like a knife twisting in her chest. When she'd finally closed the money laundering case 6 months into their relationship, Maya had faced the most difficult decision of her career. The Bureau had offered her an out, a clean extraction that would have meant disappearing from David's life forever. Instead, she'd done something unprecedented. She'd requested permission to maintain her cover indefinitely, to build a life that could serve as a perfect observation post for the dozens of other investigations brewing beneath Charleston's polished surface. Her superior, Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Morrison, had been skeptical. Personal attachments and undercover work were dangerous, emotional compromises that could unravel years of careful planning. But Maya had presented her case with the methodical precision that had made her one of the Bureau's most effective deep cover operatives. Charleston's elite moved in interconnected circles. Marriages were business alliances, social events were intelligence goldmines, and a wife with the right background could access information that would take years to gather. Through traditional surveillance, the wedding had been Patricia Whitmore's first battlefield. From the moment David had brought Maya home to meet his family, his mother had regarded her with the kind of barely concealed hostility typically reserved for unwelcome insects. Maya's background story, carefully crafted by bureau analysts, painted her as the daughter of a deceased small-town pharmacist from rural Georgia, a scholarship student who'd worked her way through college and now taught elementary school. It was perfectly unremarkable, thoroughly middle-class, and in Patricia's eyes, completely unacceptable. Patricia Whitmore was a woman who collected social connections like trophies, each relationship catalogued according to its potential value in advancing the family's standing. At 62, she was elegantly preserved in the way that only serious money could achieve, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed, her wardrobe consisting entirely of designer pieces that whispered rather than shouted their expense. She sat on the boards of 4 major charities, hosted fundraisers that routinely raised 6 figures, and had connections that reached into every level of Charleston society from the mayor's office to the federal courthouse. The engagement announcement had been Patricia's first tactical strike. Instead of the warm, welcoming embrace that David had promised, Maya had walked into a perfectly orchestrated ambush disguised as a family dinner. Patricia had invited 2 other couples, both families with eligible daughters who just happened to be David's age and infinitely more suitable according to the unspoken rules of their social stratosphere. Catherine Middleton Hayes had been positioned at David's right hand. Her conversation peppered with references to their shared childhood summers at the family compound in Kiowa Island and casual mentions of her recent promotion to senior associate at Charleston's most prestigious law firm. Across the table, Amanda Thornton Price had regaled the group with stories from her latest humanitarian mission to Costa Rica, where her family's foundation had funded a new school, though she'd somehow managed to make even charity work sound like an accomplishment reserved for those with the proper breeding. Maya had sat through the dinner with the kind of studied grace she'd perfected during months of etiquette training at Quantico, smiling at the appropriate moments and deflecting the increasingly pointed questions about her family history and career aspirations. But she'd also been taking mental notes, cataloging the subtle ways Patricia worked to isolate and diminish her, the careful placement of conversational landmines designed to highlight everything Maya supposedly lacked, the real education had come later, during the extended engagement period when Maya had been gradually introduced to the broader network of Charleston society. Patricia's campaign against her had been masterful in its subtlety, a death by 1,000 tiny cuts administered with surgical precision. At charity luncheons, Maya would find herself seated at tables with the youngest, least influential attendees while Patricia held court at the center of the room. At cocktail parties, conversations would somehow shift away from topics where Maya might contribute meaningfully, focusing instead on prep school memories and family connections that predated the Civil War. The whispered comments were the worst part, designed to be just audible enough to register but never quite clear enough to confront directly. Such a sweet girl, but you can see she's trying so hard to fit in. It's wonderful that David is so generous with his affections, though one does wonder about compatibility in the long term. Education is so important, though there's really no substitute for proper breeding, is there? Maya's job at Riverside Elementary School became another weapon in Patricia's arsenal. During introductions at social gatherings, Patricia would somehow manage to make elementary education sound like a temporary hobby rather than a career, often following up with pointed questions about Maya's long-term plans that carried the clear implication that surely she didn't intend to continue working once she married into the Whitmore family. The wedding itself had been a beautifully choreographed nightmare. Patricia had insisted on handling the arrangements, claiming it as a mother's privilege while systematically excluding Maya from every meaningful decision. The guest list favored the Whitmore family's extensive social network, relegating Maya's carefully constructed cover family to a handful of bureau operatives playing distant relatives and former colleagues. The ceremony was held at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, one of Charleston's most historic and exclusive venues, with a reception at the country club that had been in the Whitmore family for 4 generations. Maya had walked down the aisle knowing that half the congregation was there to witness what they considered David's regrettable but hopefully temporary lapse in judgment. Patricia's toast at the reception had been a masterpiece of passive aggression, welcoming Maya to the family while simultaneously emphasizing how different she was from the women who had previously married Whitmore men, all of whom had brought substantial social and financial assets to their unions. The first year of marriage had been a careful dance of psychological warfare. Maya maintained her teaching position despite increasingly strong suggestions from Patricia that it was unnecessary and somewhat embarrassing for a Whitmore wife to work in such a modest profession. She attended the endless cycle of charity events, garden parties, and cultural functions that comprised Charleston's social calendar, gradually building her own network of contacts while enduring Patricia's constant undermining. The house had become another battlefield. David had inherited a property from his grandfather, a charming craftsman bungalow in the historic district that Maya genuinely loved. But Patricia launched a campaign to convince them to move into the family compound, arguing that the neighborhood was declining and that their current home was unsuitable for the kind of entertaining expected of their social position. When that failed, she began a series of unexpected visits, always coinciding with moments when Maya was at her most casual or the house was at its most lived in. Patricia had a gift for arriving just as Maya was grading papers at the kitchen table, her red pen and scattered student assignments making the house look like a working classroom rather than a proper home. Or she'd appear on Saturday mornings when Maya was still in her exercise clothes, having returned from the 5-mile runs that served as both stress relief and physical conditioning for her real job. Each visit came with subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions, recommendations for housekeepers or interior decorators who could help Maya achieve a more appropriate standard of domestic presentation. The social isolation was perhaps Patricia's most effective weapon. Maya found herself gradually excluded from the inner circles of Charleston society, invited to events only when protocol demanded it and seated with the wives of junior partners and visiting academics rather than the established social hierarchy. Conversations would pause when she approached groups at parties, resuming with topics that somehow always excluded her potential contributions. Patricia's network of friends became an extension of her influence, each woman contributing her own subtle undermining to the campaign. Margaret Ashworth, whose family had founded one of Charleston's oldest banks, would somehow always steer conversations toward topics that highlighted Maya's outsider status. Caroline Fitzgerald, whose husband sat on the federal court, had a talent for asking seemingly innocent questions about Maya's family that exposed the thin nature of her cover story. Elizabeth Randolph, whose charity work included connections to law enforcement, occasionally made comments about the importance of background checks and knowing who one was truly dealing with that made Maya's heart race with carefully concealed panic. The financial pressure was more subtle but equally effective. While David's trust fund provided them with a comfortable lifestyle, Patricia controlled access to the family's broader resources and social capital. Invitations to important events came through her, business opportunities for David's nonprofit were filtered through her connections, and access to the kind of institutional support that could transform his modest organization into a major force for change required her approval. Maya watched her husband gradually wear down under the pressure, his initial defiance of his mother's disapproval slowly eroding as the costs of his choice became apparent. His nonprofit struggled to secure major donors, his applications for prestigious fellowships were mysteriously unsuccessful, and his efforts to expand his organization's reach repeatedly hit bureaucratic walls that seemed to dissolve for families with better connections. The psychological toll was designed to be cumulative. Each small slight, each excluded invitation, each condescending comment added to a growing weight that was supposed to eventually convince Maya that she was fighting a battle she could never win. Patricia's strategy was elegant in its simplicity, creating conditions where Maya would eventually choose to leave rather than continue enduring the constant pressure of being perpetually judged and found wanting. But Patricia Whitmore had made one critical miscalculation. She had assumed she was dealing with an ordinary woman who could be worn down by social pressure and psychological manipulation. She had no idea that her daughter-in-law was a federal agent trained in withstanding interrogation, psychological pressure, and deep cover operations that could last for years. More importantly, she had no idea that every snub, every whispered comment, and every orchestrated slight was being catalogued as evidence in an investigation that was gradually building toward charges that would destroy everything she had spent her life building. What Patricia Whitmore never understood was that her daughter-in-law's daily routine of leaving for Riverside Elementary at 7:30 each morning was itself an elaborate performance. Maya would kiss David goodbye at the front door, drive her modest Honda Civic through the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, and park in the faculty lot beside the playground where children's laughter echoed across the asphalt. But the lesson plans tucked into her canvas tote bag were only part of the story. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The real work began in room 14B, where Maya taught 3rd grade with the kind of patient dedication that had earned her genuine respect from both colleagues and parents. Her students adored her, drawn to her calm energy and the way she could make even the most complex concepts feel accessible. What they didn't know was that their teacher possessed a photographic memory honed through years of FBI training, that her gentle patience had been forged in interrogation rooms, and that the same observational skills she used to identify learning disabilities could catalog criminal behavior with surgical precision. During lunch breaks, while other teachers graded papers or prepared afternoon lessons, Maya would slip away to her car and activate the encrypted communication system hidden beneath her dashboard. Her handler, Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, would receive detailed reports about conversations overheard at charity events, financial discrepancies noticed during social gatherings, and behavioral patterns observed among Charleston's elite. The soccer mom chatting about her husband's new boat might unwittingly provide intelligence about unexplained wealth. The casual mention of a business trip could correlate with suspicious banking activity flagged by the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. Maya's teaching position wasn't just cover, it was strategic positioning. Riverside Elementary drew its enrollment from Charleston's most affluent families, parents who attended the same country clubs, invested with the same financial advisors, and socialized in overlapping circles that created a web of financial and social connections. During parent-teacher conferences, Maya would listen to seemingly innocent conversations about family vacations, home renovations, and investment strategies, filing away information that federal investigators had been trying to gather for years through traditional surveillance methods. The irony wasn't lost on her that Patricia's constant attempts to make her feel intellectually inferior were happening while Maya was simultaneously earning her doctorate in criminal psychology through an accelerated FBI program. The evenings Patricia assumed were spent grading spelling tests and cutting out construction paper letters were actually dedicated to advanced coursework in behavioral analysis, financial crime investigation, and organized crime psychology. Her professors at the FBI Academy knew her as Agent Castellanos, a rising star in the Bureau's white-collar crime division with an unprecedented ability to maintain deep cover while gathering actionable intelligence. Maya's academic background was far more extensive than her elementary teaching credential suggested. She held a master's degree in forensic accounting from Georgetown University, had completed specialized training in international banking fraud at Quantico, and spoke 4 languages fluently, skills that proved invaluable when investigating the complex network of offshore accounts and shell companies that financed Charleston's darker enterprises. Her undergraduate work at Yale had been in economics and psychology, a combination that provided the analytical foundation for understanding both the mechanics of financial crime and the psychological profiles of white-collar criminals. The Bureau had recruited Maya during her senior year at Yale, recognizing her unique combination of intellectual capabilities and personal background that made her ideal for long-term undercover operations. Her ability to blend seamlessly into different social environments, combined with her gift for inspiring trust and confidence, had made her one of the youngest agents ever selected for the Bureau's elite deep cover program. Her training had been exhaustive, encompassing everything from advanced martial arts and weapons proficiency to etiquette lessons and social psychology courses designed to help her navigate the complex hierarchies of high society. Before the Charleston assignment, Maya had successfully completed 3 major undercover operations. She had posed as a graduate student at Stanford to infiltrate a technology theft ring that was selling classified research to foreign governments. She had worked as a financial advisor in Miami to expose a complex mortgage fraud scheme that had cost investors hundreds of millions of dollars. Most recently, she had spent 8 months as a curator at a prestigious Manhattan gallery, uncovering an international art forgery operation that had been operating for over a decade. Each assignment had required her to construct a complete alternate identity, to become someone else so thoroughly that even she sometimes struggled to remember where Maya Castellanos ended and her cover identity began. The Charleston operation was different, though, because it wasn't scheduled to end. The Bureau's intelligence suggested that the city served as a hub for multiple criminal enterprises, from money laundering and tax evasion to political corruption and organized crime connections. Building a permanent presence within the social structure that enabled these activities was considered a strategic priority worth the unprecedented investment of resources. Maya's marriage to David had been genuine, a complication that the Bureau had initially considered removing her for before recognizing its potential value. A wife embedded within one of Charleston's most prominent families could access information and social circles that would be impossible to penetrate through traditional investigative methods. The decision to allow the relationship to continue had required approval from the highest levels of the FBI hierarchy, along with the establishment of protocols designed to protect both Maya's cover and David's unwitting role in the operation. The psychological toll of maintaining such an elaborate deception was something the Bureau's training had prepared her for in theory but which proved far more complex in practice. Living with David while simultaneously investigating his social circle created a constant tension between her professional obligations and her personal feelings. She genuinely loved her husband, admired his commitment to social justice, and appreciated his fundamental decency. But she was also acutely aware that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies, that she was using his trust and affection to further an investigation that could potentially destroy the world he had always known. David's nonprofit work provided another layer of access that proved invaluable to Maya's mission. His organization, Charleston Educational Reform Initiative, worked with schools throughout the region, bringing him into contact with politicians, business leaders, and community activists who represented cross-sections of the city's power structure. Board meetings, fundraising events, and community forums became intelligence-gathering opportunities where Maya could observe interactions between key figures in Charleston's political and business communities. The financial records Maya had access to through David's position revealed patterns that traditional surveillance had missed. Donation patterns to the nonprofit often correlated with favorable zoning decisions, business permits, and municipal contracts. Board members who recommended specific vendors for the organization's projects frequently had undisclosed financial interests in those companies. The charity auctions and fundraising galas that David organized became opportunities for Maya to witness transactions that appeared legitimate on the surface but followed patterns consistent with money laundering operations. Maya's teaching colleagues at Riverside Elementary unknowingly provided another intelligence network. Teachers often heard parents discussing business dealings, family financial pressures, and personal relationships that revealed connections between seemingly unrelated criminal activities. The school's parent association included wives and husbands from every major family in Charleston's elite circle, creating a social environment where information flowed freely among people who assumed their conversations were private and inconsequential. The physical skills Maya had acquired during her FBI training remained sharp through a carefully maintained exercise routine that she disguised as a commitment to personal fitness. Her morning runs through Charleston's historic district served dual purposes, providing both cardiovascular conditioning and surveillance opportunities as she mapped the neighborhood patterns of key targets. The self-defense classes she attended at a local gym were actually advanced martial arts training designed to maintain her combat readiness. The yoga studio she frequented was run by a former military contractor who provided covert refresher training in weapons handling and tactical operations. Maya's apartment had been carefully equipped with surveillance and communication technology that remained invisible to casual inspection. The laptop she used for lesson planning contained encrypted drives with terabytes of financial records, surveillance photos, and intelligence reports. Her cell phone included secure communication applications that allowed her to coordinate with other federal agents operating in the region. The jewelry box on her dresser concealed a high-resolution camera system capable of photographing documents and recording conversations with broadcast-quality clarity. The Bureau had established multiple backup identities and extraction protocols to protect Maya's cover if her true identity was ever discovered. Safe houses had been prepared throughout the Southeast, complete with transportation, financial resources, and communication equipment that would allow her to disappear within hours if necessary. Federal marshals were positioned to provide emergency protection, and contingency plans existed to relocate David to witness protection if his safety became compromised through his association with Maya. The psychological profile the Bureau had developed on Patricia Whitmore proved remarkably accurate in predicting her behavior patterns and strategic approaches. FBI behavioral analysts had identified her as a classic narcissistic manipulator who used social pressure and emotional manipulation to control those around her. The analysis predicted that she would attempt to isolate Maya from support systems, undermine her confidence through systematic criticism, and create situations designed to force her to choose between her marriage and her self-respect. Understanding Patricia's psychological tactics allowed Maya to respond strategically rather than emotionally to each attack. When Patricia excluded her from important family events, Maya used the time to conduct surveillance operations. When social gatherings became exercises in public humiliation, Maya collected intelligence about the other attendees. Each slight and insult became an opportunity to gather information that moved the investigation forward, transforming what was intended as psychological warfare into professional advantage. The 3-year timeline for the investigation was approaching its conclusion, with federal prosecutors preparing indictments that would fundamentally alter Charleston's political and social landscape. Maya's position within the Whitmore family had provided access to information that connected dozens of seemingly independent criminal enterprises into a comprehensive network of corruption that reached from City Hall to federal courthouse. The charity organizations that Patricia championed were revealed as elaborate money laundering operations. The investment opportunities she recommended to friends were sophisticated Ponzi schemes. The social connections she cultivated enabled tax evasion, political corruption, and organized crime activities that had operated with impunity for decades, but the investigation's success had created an impossible personal dilemma for Maya. Completing her mission would mean destroying the social world that David had always known, potentially implicating friends and family members in criminal activities that would result in prison sentences and social ostracism. The evidence she had gathered could send dozens of Charleston's most respected citizens to federal prison, including several people David considered mentors and close friends. The foundation that supported his nonprofit work would collapse once Its criminal funding sources were exposed. Maya had requested multiple meetings with her supervisors to discuss the personal complications of her situation, but the Bureau's position remained unchanged. The investigation had uncovered criminal activities that posed threats to national security and public safety. Her personal feelings about the collateral damage to innocent parties like David couldn't override the federal government's obligation to prosecute crimes and protect the public interest. The weight of carrying such an enormous secret while maintaining the facade of a normal marriage had begun to affect Maya's psychological well-being. She found herself questioning fundamental assumptions about identity, loyalty, and moral obligation that had previously seemed clear-cut. The woman who went to sleep next to David each night was genuinely his wife, but she was also a federal agent preparing to destroy his family's social standing and potentially implicate his relatives in criminal proceedings that would dominate headlines for years. Patricia's escalating campaign of psychological warfare had unknowingly provided Maya with the perfect cover for the emotional distance that maintaining her deception required. Her mother-in-law's constant criticism and social undermining created a logical explanation for any stress or distraction that might otherwise have raised David's suspicions about his wife's true activities. The isolation Patricia worked so hard to create actually served Maya's professional needs by limiting her social obligations and providing more time for her real work. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock embossed with the Riverside Country Club's gold monogram, delivered by private courier on a Tuesday morning when the Charleston air hung thick with the promise of summer storms. Maya examined the elegant script announcing the club's annual Spring Gala, a fundraising event for the Children's Hospital Foundation that would bring together every influential family in the city for an evening of champagne, charity auctions, and carefully orchestrated social maneuvering. Patricia's handwritten note attached to the invitation was characteristically precise in its passive aggression. David mentioned you might enjoy attending a proper Charleston social event. The dress code is formal cocktail attire. I do hope you have something appropriate. The message carried the clear implication that Maya's wardrobe was likely inadequate for such an elevated occasion. Another small cut designed to reinforce her outsider status within the Whitmore family's social sphere. Maya understood immediately that this invitation represented something far more significant than a routine social obligation. The Spring Gala was Charleston's most exclusive annual event, with a guest list that read like a directory of the city's political and financial elite. Federal investigators had been trying to gain access to this gathering for years, recognizing it as an annual convergence of targets that would require months of individual surveillance to observe under normal circumstances. Patricia's invitation, intended as another opportunity for public humiliation, was actually providing Maya with unprecedented access to the culmination of her 3-year investigation. The guest list that Patricia proudly shared during their next encounter revealed the scope of what Maya would be witnessing. Mayor Jonathan Richardson would be attending with his wife, despite ongoing federal scrutiny of city contracting procedures that had enriched his campaign contributors. Federal Judge Harrison Blackwell was serving as honorary chairman, though his recent judicial decisions had shown unusual favoritism toward defendants represented by specific law firms. Bank President Marcus Thornburg would be hosting a VIP reception, unaware that his institution was under investigation for facilitating money laundering operations through its offshore banking partnerships. Maya spent the weeks leading up to the gala conducting intensive preparation that went far beyond selecting an appropriate dress. Her FBI handlers provided detailed briefings on every confirmed attendee, including psychological profiles, financial records, and surveillance photographs that would help her identify key targets in the social environment. Tiny recording devices were sewn into the beading of her evening clutch, virtually undetectable but capable of capturing conversations with courtroom-quality clarity. Her jewelry included miniature cameras disguised as decorative elements, positioned to photograph documents or capture facial recognition data without arousing suspicion. The Bureau had coordinated additional surveillance operations around the gala, positioning agents throughout the country club grounds and monitoring all electronic communications in the vicinity. Maya would be the primary intelligence gatherer inside the event, but her work would be supported by a comprehensive operation designed to capture every aspect of the evening's activities. License plate readers would document which vehicles arrived together, suggesting business relationships that might not be publicly acknowledged. Telecommunications intercepts would monitor any phone calls or text messages sent from the venue. Financial monitoring systems would track any electronic transactions conducted during or immediately after the event. Maya's preparation included intensive rehearsal of her cover story and social positioning for the evening. She would present herself as the devoted elementary school teacher accompanying her husband to support his mother's charitable interests, a role that would allow her to move freely through the event while appearing completely harmless to anyone conducting sensitive Business discussions. Her questions would seem motivated by polite curiosity rather than professional intelligence gathering. Her presence at private conversations would appear accidental rather than strategically positioned. The psychological challenge of preparing for the gala was immense. Maya knew that several of the attendees were targets of indictments that would be unsealed within weeks of the event. She would be socializing with people who considered her beneath their notice while simultaneously gathering evidence that would send some of them to federal prison. The cognitive dissonance of maintaining friendly conversation with individuals she was actively investigating required the kind of compartmentalization that only extensive training could provide. David's excitement about attending the gala was genuine and heartbreaking. He saw the invitation as evidence that his mother was finally accepting Maya into the family's social circle, a milestone he had been hoping for since their engagement. His plans for the evening included introducing Maya to potential donors for his educational foundation, networking opportunities that he believed could transform his organization's ability to serve Charleston's underprivileged students. Maya listened to his enthusiasm while knowing that many of his mother's friends were funding their charitable work through criminal proceeds that would soon be frozen by federal asset forfeiture proceedings. The dress Maya ultimately selected was a masterpiece of strategic planning disguised as elegant simplicity. The deep navy blue gown was sophisticated enough to meet the evening's formal requirements while remaining understated enough to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. The fabric was chosen specifically for its acoustic properties, minimizing the sound of hidden recording equipment. The cut was designed to conceal the positioning of miniature cameras while allowing freedom of movement for potential defensive situations. Even her shoes were selected for their silent soles and stability, providing the foundation for extended periods of surveillance work while maintaining the appearance of fashionable formality. Patricia's pre-gala instructions revealed her intentions for the evening with crystalline clarity. She scheduled a family dinner before the event, ostensibly to coordinate their arrival but actually to conduct a final briefing on social expectations and behavioral guidelines. Her recommendations for Maya's conduct were delivered with the kind of condescending patience typically reserved for instructing children on proper manners. Maya should speak only when spoken to by her social superiors. She should avoid discussing her teaching career unless specifically asked, and then only briefly. Under no circumstances should she attempt to engage in conversations about business, politics, or any topics that might reveal her intellectual limitations. The dinner conversation provided Maya with intelligence about the evening's unofficial agenda that proved invaluable for her mission planning. Patricia casually mentioned that several important business discussions would be taking place in the club's private dining rooms, arrangements that had been coordinated weeks in advance. The charity auction would include items donated by companies seeking to demonstrate their community involvement while simultaneously building relationships with city officials responsible for regulatory oversight. The evening's entertainment would provide background noise that would make sensitive conversations less likely to be overheard by unwanted listeners. Maya recognized that Patricia was unwittingly providing operational intelligence about what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated opportunity for criminal conspirators to conduct business under the cover of charitable fundraising. The private dining rooms would serve as secure meeting locations for discussions that couldn't take place in offices subject to federal surveillance. The auction would function as a venue for transactions that might appear suspicious in traditional business settings. The social atmosphere would provide plausible explanations for why individuals under federal investigation were meeting together. The evening's arrival procedures had been choreographed with military precision, though the guests would experience them as elegant hospitality. Valet parking would document which vehicles arrived in sequence, potentially revealing coordination between parties who claimed no business relationships. Reception lines would position photographers to capture images of every guest interaction, creating a visual record of who spoke with whom throughout the evening. Cocktail service would be provided by staff members trained to observe and remember conversations, some of whom were actually federal agents working undercover as temporary employees. Maya's strategy for the evening involved careful positioning to observe without appearing to surveillance key conversations while maintaining her cover as David's socially awkward wife. She would use bathroom visits as opportunities to photograph documents or transmit intelligence to her handlers. Her participation in conversations would be designed to elicit information through seemingly innocent questions that invited targets to reveal details about their activities. Her interactions with other wives would provide access to informal intelligence networks that often carried more accurate information than official business channels. The country club itself had been prepared for the evening in ways that served both hospitality and intelligence gathering purposes. Federal technicians had installed additional surveillance equipment in locations that would capture conversations in areas where guests might assume they had privacy. Telecommunications monitoring equipment had been positioned to intercept any phone calls or electronic communications sent from the venue. Even the floral arrangements had been positioned to provide optimal acoustic environments for recording equipment while creating visual barriers that would encourage guests to speak more freely. Maya's handlers had prepared contingency plans for every aspect of the evening that might compromise her cover or personal safety. Emergency extraction protocols were in place if her identity was discovered or if she encountered immediate physical danger. Medical support was positioned nearby in case her cover required her to appear ill or injured as an excuse to leave the venue. Communication protocols allowed her to request immediate backup if she encountered situations that exceeded her ability to handle alone. The psychological preparation for the evening required Maya to compartmentalize her personal relationships in ways that challenged every instinct about loyalty and family obligations. She would be gathering evidence that could implicate David's relatives, friends, and professional colleagues in criminal activities that would destroy their lives and reputations. Her success as an agent would come at the cost of her husband's trust and potentially his freedom if his nonprofit had unknowingly accepted criminally derived funding. As the evening of the gala approached, Maya found herself conducting final equipment checks and reviewing target profiles while simultaneously helping David select his formal wear and discussing their plans for the evening. The duality of her situation had never been more stark. She was preparing for what would likely be the culminating operation of her 3-year undercover assignment while maintaining the facade of a nervous wife attending her first major social event in Charleston's elite society. The weather forecast for the evening called for clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for the kind of outdoor cocktail reception where important conversations often took place away from the formality of indoor surveillance. Maya understood that the seemingly perfect weather would actually create additional challenges for her mission, as key targets might choose to conduct sensitive discussions in garden areas where recording equipment would be less effective and where her presence would be more conspicuous. Patricia's final phone call before the gala contained instructions that revealed her ultimate intentions for the evening. Maya was to serve as a silent accessory to the Whitmore family's social presentation, visible enough to demonstrate David's marital status but insignificant enough to avoid drawing attention away from Patricia's networking activities. The evening would serve as Patricia's opportunity to demonstrate her family's continued social prominence while simultaneously showcasing what she considered David's poor judgment in his choice of spouse. Maya listened to these instructions while reviewing federal surveillance photographs of attendees who would be present at the gala, many of whom would be indicted within weeks based on evidence she had helped gather. The irony wasn't lost on her that Patricia was orchestrating what she intended as Maya's social humiliation while unknowingly facilitating the final phase of an investigation that would destroy the very social structure she was so desperate to dominate. The Riverside Country Club's grand ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic rainbows across walls lined with portraits of Charleston's founding families. Maya stood at the entrance beside David, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they surveyed the assembled crowd of Charleston's most powerful citizens. The evening had begun exactly as Patricia had orchestrated, with Maya positioned as the uncomfortable outsider trying desperately to fit into a world that would never truly accept her. The first hour had unfolded according to Patricia's carefully designed script. Maya had been introduced to a succession of Charleston's social elite, each encounter calculated to highlight her inadequacies. The conversations followed predictable patterns, polite inquiries about her teaching career that carried undertones of surprise that someone of her modest background had married into the Whitmore family. She had endured condescending comments about the challenges of maintaining proper social standards on a teacher's salary, suggestions that she might benefit from guidance about appropriate charitable involvement, and thinly veiled questions about whether she planned to continue working now that she was part of such an established family. Maya's responses had been pitch perfect, displaying just enough social awkwardness to reinforce Patricia's narrative, while gathering intelligence that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. The wives of Charleston's business leaders spoke freely around her, assuming that her obvious discomfort meant she wasn't paying attention to their conversations. They discussed their husbands' recent business trips to offshore banking centers, complained about the stress of managing multiple properties in countries with favorable tax laws, and shared recommendations for lawyers who specialized in complex estate planning strategies that skirted federal reporting requirements. Patricia had assigned herself the role of gracious hostess, apologizing for her daughter-in-law's social limitations. Each introduction came with explanatory commentary designed to lower expectations and explain away Maya's presence. "Maya is still adjusting to Charleston society," became Patricia's standard disclaimer, delivered with the kind of patient smile typically reserved for discussing learning disabilities. "She's wonderfully dedicated to her students, though of course that keeps her quite busy with more practical concerns." The charity auction had provided Maya with perfect cover for surveillance operations that captured evidence of criminal conspiracies. Operating under the guise of philanthropic generosity, bidding patterns revealed coordination between companies seeking city contracts and the officials responsible for awarding them. Art purchases created paper trails for money laundering operations that used charitable donations to legitimize criminally derived wealth. Corporate sponsorship packages established relationships between organized crime figures and legitimate businesses that provided cover for their activities. Maya's hidden recording equipment captured conversations that federal prosecutors would later describe as the most comprehensive evidence of organized corruption ever gathered in a single evening. Mayor Richardson discussed zoning variance applications with developers who had made substantial campaign contributions, explicitly linking political donations to favorable regulatory decisions. Federal Judge Blackwell received an envelope from a defense attorney whose clients had received surprisingly lenient sentences, a transaction that occurred during a bathroom break that the judge assumed would be private. The evening's turning point came when Maya excused herself from a particularly tedious conversation about private school admission strategies to visit the ladies' room. As she walked through the club's elegant corridors, she overheard Patricia's voice drifting from the private dining room that had been reserved for VIP donors. The door had been left slightly ajar, apparently to allow the circulation of air during what appeared to be an intense business discussion. Maya positioned herself near the doorway, pretending to examine a historical photograph while actually activating the recording equipment in her evening clutch. The conversation inside involved voices she recognized from 3 years of social gatherings: Patricia, Marcus Thornburg from Charleston First National Bank, City Council Chairman Robert Ashworth, and surprisingly, David's uncle William Whitmore, whom Maya had always considered one of the family's most respectable members. Patricia's voice carried clearly through the gap in the door, her words measured and confident in a way that suggested she was accustomed to being the authority in such discussions. The Richardson administration has been very accommodating, but we need to be prepared for potential changes after the next election. Our friends at the federal level have indicated that certain investigations are moving toward resolution, which should eliminate some of our recent concerns about scrutiny. Marcus Thornburg's response chilled Maya's blood with its casual discussion of criminal activity that she had been investigating for years. The offshore transfers have been completed according to our established protocols. The shell companies in the Cayman Islands have processed the funds through 3 intermediary banks before final placement in the Swiss accounts. Even if federal investigators obtain warrant access to our domestic records, the international banking privacy laws will prevent them from tracing the transactions to their ultimate destinations. Maya's heart rate accelerated as she realized she was witnessing a live coordination meeting between the principal targets of her investigation. Her training had prepared her for high-stress intelligence gathering, but the emotional complexity of hearing David's family members discuss criminal activities that would send them to federal prison for decades created a psychological pressure that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. William Whitmore's contribution to the conversation revealed the scope of the criminal conspiracy in ways that federal surveillance had never been able to establish. The Foundation's assets have been diversified according to our contingency planning. If the political climate becomes unfavorable, we can liquidate the domestic holdings and relocate operations to jurisdictions with more favorable regulatory environments. The children's charities provide excellent cover for international fund transfers, since humanitarian organizations face fewer reporting requirements. City Council Chairman Ashworth's voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to coordinating complex illegal operations. The development projects on the east side will provide significant opportunities for cash flow management. Construction contracts allow for substantial cost overruns that can accommodate our financial requirements without attracting regulatory attention. The Housing Authority has already approved the preliminary plans, and our friends in the zoning department have indicated their continued cooperation. Maya realized that she was hearing the operational details of a criminal conspiracy that encompassed municipal corruption, international money laundering, and charity fraud on a scale that exceeded anything federal investigators had suspected. The conversation represented years of patient intelligence gathering condensed into a single recording that would provide evidence for dozens of federal indictments. But it was also confirming that David's entire family was involved in criminal activities that would destroy his life when the truth was revealed. Patricia's next words struck Maya like a physical blow, though she maintained her position by the doorway through sheer force of will. David's wife continues to be a potential liability. Her background is unremarkable, but her presence at family gatherings creates unnecessary exposure to someone outside our established circle of trust. We've been successful in limiting her access to sensitive information, but her marriage to David creates ongoing risks that we should consider addressing. The implication of Patricia's words was unmistakable. Maya wasn't just being socially marginalized. She was being discussed as a security threat that might require more direct action to neutralize. The realization that her cover might be compromised, that she might be in immediate physical danger, activated every survival instinct that FBI training had ingrained in her psychological responses. Marcus Thornburg's reply confirmed Maya's worst fears about her situation. Background investigations have revealed some inconsistencies in her personal history that warrant further scrutiny. The elementary school teaching position seems genuine, but several aspects of her family background don't align with public records. We should consider engaging more sophisticated resources to verify her actual identity and determine whether she represents a genuine threat to our operations. Maya's mind raced through the implications of what she was hearing. Her cover identity had been carefully constructed by FBI specialists, but the kind of background investigation that these individuals could commission would likely reveal discrepancies that would expose her true identity. She was potentially minutes away from being discovered as a federal agent, surrounded by individuals who had just discussed eliminating her as a security threat. William Whitmore's voice took on a tone of measured consideration that Maya recognized from family dinners where he had weighed complex decisions. Patricia's concerns are valid, but we must also consider David's emotional attachment to his wife. Any action against her would need to appear accidental or natural to avoid arousing his suspicions. He's already shown concerning loyalty to her despite our family's obvious disapproval. The casual discussion of potentially murdering her while framing it as an accident created a surge of adrenaline that Maya had to consciously control to avoid giving away her position. Her FBI training had prepared her for dangerous situations, but those scenarios had always involved known criminals. In obvious confrontational settings, the possibility of being killed by her husband's family members during a charity gala while dressed in formal wear created a surreal psychological pressure that challenged every assumption about her operational security. City Council Chairman Ashworth's contribution to the conversation revealed the extent to which Charleston's political establishment was involved in the criminal conspiracy. Law enforcement contacts have confirmed that federal investigations are focusing on financial institutions and development projects rather than charitable organizations. As long as we maintain operational discipline and avoid drawing attention to our activities, the current threat level remains manageable. Maya realized that the conspiracy included corruption of law enforcement officials who were providing intelligence about federal investigations to the very criminals being investigated. The revelation explained why several of her previous intelligence reports had seemed to reach targets before federal action could be taken, why witnesses had disappeared before they could be interviewed, and why evidence had been destroyed before search warrants could be executed. Patricia's voice carried a note of finality that suggested the meeting was concluding. We'll proceed with enhanced background verification for David's wife while maintaining current operational protocols. If she proves to be a genuine threat, we'll implement appropriate countermeasures. The Foundation's annual report should be completed by month's end, which will provide cover for any financial adjustments that become necessary. Maya heard chairs moving and realized that the meeting was ending. She had perhaps 30 seconds to clear the area before the participants emerged from the private dining room. Her position in the corridor would be impossible to explain if she was discovered eavesdropping on what was obviously a private business discussion. But her hands were trembling with a combination of fear and rage that made coordinated movement difficult. The rage wasn't just about the criminal activities she had documented or even the casual discussion of murdering her. It was about the 3 years of psychological warfare that Patricia had waged against her, the systematic campaign to make her feel worthless and unwelcome, all while planning to potentially eliminate her as a security threat. Every social snub, every condescending comment, every deliberate humiliation had been orchestrated by someone who was simultaneously planning her possible murder. Maya forced herself to move away from the doorway with the kind of controlled precision that FBI training had drilled into her muscle memory. She walked to the ladies' room with measured steps that appeared calm while her mind processed the operational implications of what she had just learned. Her cover was potentially compromised, her physical safety was in immediate danger, and she was surrounded by individuals who had just discussed killing her while attending a charity gala. The face that looked back at her from the ladies' room mirror showed no trace of the emotional tornado that was raging inside her chest. Her training had taught her to compartmentalize psychological pressure, to maintain operational effectiveness even under extreme stress. But this situation exceeded anything she had prepared for, combining personal betrayal with professional danger in ways that challenged her ability to think clearly about her next steps. Maya activated the emergency communication protocol that would alert her FBI handlers to her situation while maintaining the appearance of checking her makeup in the mirror. The encrypted message would inform them that her cover was potentially compromised and that she was in immediate danger from The targets of their investigation. Federal agents positioned around the country club would begin implementing emergency extraction procedures while maintaining surveillance on the individuals who had just discussed murdering a federal officer, but Maya realized that extraction would mean abandoning the operation just as it was reaching its culmination, walking away from 3 years of intelligence gathering without completing the mission that had consumed her professional and personal life. The recording equipment had captured evidence that would support dozens of federal indictments, but only if she could maintain her cover long enough to deliver it safely to federal prosecutors. The choice she faced was between personal safety and professional duty, between protecting herself and completing an investigation that could dismantle a criminal conspiracy that had operated with impunity for decades. It was a decision that would define not just the success of her mission, but her understanding of her own identity as both Maya Castellanos, the federal agent, and Maya Whitmore, the elementary school teacher who had genuinely fallen in love with a man whose family was planning to kill her. Maya emerged from the ladies' room with the kind of crystalline calm that only comes from accepting that survival requires absolute precision. Every movement, every expression, every word would now determine whether she lived to see morning or became another unexplained tragedy that Charleston's elite would discuss with appropriate sadness before moving on to more pressing social concerns. The recording equipment hidden in her evening clutch contained evidence that would destroy dozens of lives, but only if she could navigate the next hour without being identified as the federal agent who had been living among them for 3 years. The ballroom had taken on a different quality during her absence, as if the overheard conversation had changed the fundamental nature of reality. The same crystal chandeliers cast the same prismatic light, but now Maya saw the gathering through the lens of confirmed criminal conspiracy. Every handshake represented potential coordination of illegal activities. Every private conversation might be planning her elimination. Every smile directed toward her carried the possibility of concealed murderous intent. David was waiting near the auction display, his face bright with genuine excitement about the evening's fundraising success. His enthusiasm for his mother's charitable work created a knife edge of pain in Maya's chest as she realized that his entire worldview was built on foundations that were about to crumble. The foundation that supported his educational reform work was funded through criminal proceeds. The social connections that had shaped his identity were built on corruption and violence. The family members he respected and loved were planning to murder his wife. Patricia approached them with the kind of gracious hostility that Maya had endured for 3 years, but now she recognized it as the tactical maneuvering of someone who viewed her as a threat to be neutralized. "Maya, dear, you look a bit pale. I hope you're not feeling unwell. These large social gatherings can be overwhelming for people who aren't accustomed to them." The concern was perfectly performed, but Maya now understood it as reconnaissance, an assessment of her current psychological state and potential vulnerability. Maya's response required the most sophisticated performance of her career, projecting nervous social anxiety while concealing the operational alertness that was analyzing every detail of her environment for threats and opportunities. "I'm fine, thank you. Just taking a moment to appreciate how beautifully you've organized everything. The charity auction is raising an impressive amount for the Children's Hospital." Her words carried the appropriate deference while her eyes catalogued the positions of potential allies and enemies throughout the ballroom. William Whitmore materialized beside Patricia with the timing that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Maya's uncle-in-law had always presented himself as the family's intellectual patriarch, a distinguished professor emeritus whose academic credentials provided legitimacy for the family's social standing. But she now recognized him as the strategic mastermind behind criminal operations that had operated with academic precision for decades. His presence next to Patricia wasn't familial solidarity, it was tactical positioning for what they had planned as her final evening. "Maya, I've been hoping to have a conversation with you about your background," William said, his tone carrying the kind of scholarly interest that had always made David proud of his uncle's attention to family members. "Patricia mentioned some fascinating details about your family history in Georgia, but I'm curious about some specific aspects that seem unusual for that region. Perhaps we could step outside for some fresh air while we discuss it." Maya recognized the invitation as a potential death sentence. The country club's gardens provided numerous secluded areas where an accident could be staged with minimal risk of discovery. A slip on the garden steps, a fall into the ornamental pond, an allergic reaction to something in the evening air, any number of explanations could account for a tragic end to what had begun as such a lovely evening. Her FBI training had covered scenarios exactly like this, predator behavior disguised as social courtesy that isolated victims before eliminating them. But Maya also realized that William's suggestion provided her with the perfect opportunity to control the timing and location of the confrontation that was now inevitable. If she was going to survive the evening and complete her mission, she needed to force the revelation on her terms rather than allowing them to orchestrate her elimination according to their timeline. The garden setting would provide privacy for a conversation that would end either with her death or their exposure. That sounds lovely, Maya replied, allowing just enough hesitation to suggest social nervousness rather than operational calculation. David, would you like to join us? I know how much you enjoy your uncle's stories about family history. Her invitation to include David was tactical, ensuring that whatever happened next would occur in front of witnesses whose testimony could support her version of events if she survived to provide it. David's eager acceptance of the invitation created the protective buffer that Maya needed while simultaneously ensuring that he would witness the revelation that would destroy his understanding of his family's true nature. Patricia's momentary flash of irritation suggested that David's presence wasn't part of their planned scenario, but she recovered quickly with the kind of gracious adaptation that characterized her social manipulation strategies. The foursome moved through the ballroom's French doors onto the country club's terrace, where the evening air carried the scent of magnolia blossoms and the distant sound of Charleston's harbor bells. The garden lighting created pools of illumination, separated by shadows that could conceal any number of threats, but also provided Maya with tactical advantages if the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. William positioned himself near the terrace railing with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to controlling conversations through academic authority. Maya, I've been researching genealogical records for a family history project, and I discovered some interesting discrepancies regarding your father's pharmaceutical business in rural Georgia. The state licensing records don't seem to match the timeline you've described for his career. Maya recognized the opening gambit of an interrogation designed to expose the weaknesses in her cover story while appearing to be friendly family interest. William's academic background had taught him how to dismantle false narratives through systematic questioning, and he was applying those skills to determine whether she represented a genuine threat to their criminal operations. But his approach also provided her with the perfect setup for the revelation that would end their investigation of her background permanently. That's very perceptive of you, William, Maya replied, allowing her voice to carry just enough tension to suggest that his questions were making her uncomfortable. Family histories can be quite complex, especially when they involve sensitive professional circumstances. Her response was designed to encourage him to press harder, to commit himself to a line of questioning that would justify her eventual revelation of the truth. Patricia stepped closer with the predatory grace that Maya now recognized as the movement of someone preparing to participate in violence. William has always been so thorough in his research. I'm sure he's simply trying to help us understand your family's background more completely. After all, we want to be able to share accurate information about our daughter-in-law with our friends and associates. David's confusion was evident in his expression as he looked between his mother and uncle, unable to understand why a casual conversation about family history was creating such obvious tension. I don't understand why Maya's father's business records would be relevant to anything. She's told us about her childhood, and that should be sufficient for any reasonable family discussion. Maya realized that this was the moment when her choice between personal safety and professional duty would be made irreversibly. She could continue the performance, allow William's questioning to expose the weaknesses in her cover story, and hope that federal backup would arrive before they eliminated her as a security threat. Or she could take control of the situation by revealing her true identity in a way that would force them to abandon any plans for her elimination while simultaneously gathering evidence of their criminal conspiracy. The decision crystallized with the kind of tactical clarity that FBI training had designed to emerge under extreme pressure. Maya reached into her evening clutch with movements that appeared nervous but were actually precisely controlled, her fingers locating the federal badge that had remained hidden throughout 3 years of deep cover operations. The weight of the metal was negligible, but its symbolic power would transform the evening's entire dynamic in ways that none of them had anticipated. William, you're absolutely right that my background deserves more thorough discussion, Maya said, her voice shifting from nervous deference to professional authority with such suddenness that the transformation seemed like a personality change rather than a revelation of hidden identity. Your research skills are impressive for a literature professor, but they don't quite match the resources available to federal investigators. The badge appeared in her hand with the kind of smooth precision that spoke of countless hours of training. The leather case opening to reveal the gold shield and identification card that identified her as Special Agent Maya Castellanos of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The evening breeze caught the metal surface, reflecting the garden lighting in a way that made the Federal Eagle seem to glow with its own authority. The effect on William and Patricia was instantaneous and absolute. William's academic composure shattered like crystal hitting marble, his face draining of color as the implications of her revelation cascaded through his consciousness. The genealogical research he had been conducting to expose her cover story was suddenly revealed as a federal agent's investigation of his criminal activities. The family history he had been questioning was actually the operational background of someone who had spent 3 years gathering evidence of his crimes. Patricia's reaction was even more dramatic, her carefully maintained social facade collapsing to reveal the core of ruthless calculation that had always driven her interactions with Maya. But now that calculation was being applied to an entirely different problem. Instead of eliminating a troublesome daughter-in-law who threatened their social status, they were confronting a federal agent who possessed evidence that could send them to prison for the rest of their lives. David's confusion transformed into stunned disbelief as he stared at the badge in Maya's hand, his mind struggling to reconcile the wife he had loved for 3 years with the federal agent who had apparently been investigating his family throughout their entire relationship. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was existential, challenging every assumption he had made about love, trust, and the fundamental nature of identity. "Maya," David whispered, his voice carrying the kind of broken quality that comes from realizing that everything you believed was built on lies. "What is this? What's happening? I don't understand what you're showing us." Maya's heart broke for David even as her training demanded that she maintain operational control of the situation. "David, I'm sorry you had to learn about this here, but your family's activities have forced my hand. I've been investigating criminal conspiracies involving money laundering, political corruption, and charity fraud that have been operating in Charleston for decades. Your mother and uncle are central figures in networks that have stolen millions of dollars while hiding behind charitable foundations and social respectability." Patricia's recovery was swift and calculating, her mind immediately shifting to damage control strategies that might minimize the legal consequences of Maya's revelation. "This is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. We're a respected family with deep roots in Charleston society. The idea that we would be involved in criminal activities is absurd. Whatever evidence you think you have must be based on false information or mistaken identity." Maya's response carried the weight of 3 years of gathered intelligence and 18 months of preparation for this exact moment. "Patricia, 47 minutes ago, you participated in a meeting in the club's private dining room where you discussed offshore money laundering, municipal corruption, and plans to eliminate me as a security threat. Every word of that conversation was recorded by federal surveillance equipment. The evidence isn't mistaken or false, it's comprehensive and admissible in federal court." William's academic mind grasped the implications faster than Patricia's social calculations could process them. "You've been recording our conversations for 3 years. Every family dinner, every social gathering, every private moment when we thought we were safe from surveillance. How long have you been planning this investigation?" Maya's answer carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "The investigation into Charleston's organized crime networks began 5 years ago. I was inserted into your social circle 3 years ago specifically to gather evidence of activities that traditional surveillance couldn't penetrate. Your crimes weren't just stealing money, William. You corrupted charitable organizations that were supposed to help children. You bribed judges who were supposed to ensure justice. You turned philanthropy into a criminal enterprise while hiding behind social respectability that your victims trusted." The revelation continued to cascade through the group with earthquake-like intensity. Patricia realized that every social event she had hosted, every charity meeting she had organized, every private conversation she had considered secure had potentially been monitored by federal investigators. William understood that his academic reputation, his social standing, and his freedom were all about to be destroyed by evidence gathered by someone he had dismissed as intellectually inferior, but David's realization was the most devastating of all. The woman he had married, the person he had trusted with his heart and his future, had been deceiving him about her fundamental identity for their entire relationship. Every intimate conversation, every shared dream, every moment of vulnerability had been experienced by someone who was professionally obligated to betray his trust if necessary to complete her mission. Maya watched David's face as the full scope of her deception became clear to him, and she saw the exact moment when his love transformed into something that might never be repaired. The cost of her professional success was becoming clear in ways that FBI training had never adequately prepared her to handle. She had completed one of the most successful undercover operations in bureau history, but the price was the destruction of the only genuine happiness she had ever experienced. The silence that followed Maya's revelation lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity suspended between the world that had existed moments before and the chaos that was about to unfold. Then Patricia's voice cut through the night air with the sharp precision of breaking glass, her social composure finally shattering under the weight of federal charges that would destroy everything she had spent her life building. "You lying little..." "Nobody," Patricia snarled, her carefully cultivated Charleston accent dissolving into something raw and venomous. "You think you can waltz into our family, steal our son, and then destroy us with your pathetic government games? You have no idea who you're dealing with or how far our connections reach." William's response was more calculated but equally revealing. His academic mind had processed the tactical implications of Maya's revelation faster than Patricia's emotional reaction, and he was already shifting into the kind of strategic damage control that had protected their criminal operations for decades. "Patricia, we need to consider our legal position carefully. Making threats against a federal agent is inadvisable under current circumstances." But Maya's training had prepared her for exactly this kind of psychological pressure from targets who believed their social position made them untouchable. She remained perfectly still, her federal badge visible in her hand, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that spoke of extensive experience with criminal confrontations. "Patricia, the recording equipment has captured your threat against a federal officer. William, your suggestion that you have the connections to avoid prosecution is also being documented for the U.S. Attorney's Office." David stood frozen between his family and his wife, his world collapsing with such completeness that he seemed unable to process the competing loyalties that were tearing him apart. The man who had spent his adult life fighting for social justice was discovering that his own family represented the kind of systemic corruption he had dedicated his career to opposing. But he was also realizing that the woman he loved had deceived him so thoroughly that he questioned his ability to trust his own judgment about anything. Maya's earpiece crackled with the voice of Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, her handler coordinating the federal response from a command center positioned 3 blocks from the country club. "Agent Castellanos, we have visual confirmation of your position. Federal units are in position around the perimeter. Do you require immediate extraction or can you maintain operational control?" Maya's response was subvocal, a technique that allowed her to communicate with her handler without alerting the targets to the presence of federal backup. "Operational control maintained. Targets are contained and recording equipment is functioning. Recommend initiating arrest protocols for primary conspiracy targets within the venue." Patricia's rage was building to a crescendo that would either result in physical violence or complete psychological breakdown. The social control that had defined her identity for 6 decades was disintegrating as she realized that federal agents were probably already moving through the country club, identifying and preparing to arrest dozens of Charleston's most prominent citizens. The charity gala that was supposed to celebrate her social prominence was becoming the venue for her public humiliation and criminal prosecution. "David, you need to choose right now between your family and this federal spy who has been manipulating you for 3 years, Patricia demanded, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to absolute obedience from family members. "She's destroyed our privacy, violated our trust, and used your love to gather evidence against people who have supported this community for generations." Maya watched David's face as he struggled with the impossible choice his mother was demanding. She could see the love they had shared warring with the betrayal he was experiencing, the genuine affection he felt for his family competing with the evidence of their criminal activities that he couldn't deny. But she also saw something else. The fundamental integrity that had made her fall in love with him was forcing him to confront the moral implications of his family's actions regardless of his personal feelings about her deception. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, approached the witness stand with the kind of systematic precision that had characterized the government's case against Charleston's criminal network. "Agent Castellanos, please describe for the jury your educational background and professional qualifications prior to your undercover assignment in Charleston." Maya's response revealed the extensive credentials that Patricia Whitmore had spent 3 years dismissing as inadequate for proper society. "I hold a bachelor's degree in economics and psychology from Yale University, where I graduated summa cum laude. I completed a master's degree in forensic accounting at Georgetown University, followed by specialized training at the FBI Academy in Quantico. I've completed advanced coursework in international banking fraud, organized crime psychology, and deep cover operations. I speak 4 languages fluently and have successfully completed 7 major undercover investigations prior to the Charleston assignment." The revelation of Maya's actual qualifications created a ripple of reaction throughout the courtroom that demonstrated how completely Patricia's narrative about her inadequacies had been internalized by Charleston's social establishment. Former acquaintances who had dismissed her as an unworthy outsider were confronting evidence that she was among the most highly trained federal agents in the country, someone whose intellectual capabilities far exceeded those of the people who had considered her beneath their notice. Maya's testimony continued with methodical documentation of the criminal conspiracy that had operated under the cover of Charleston's most respected charitable organizations. She described how Patricia Whitmore had used the Children's Hospital Foundation to launder millions of dollars through a network of shell companies based in offshore banking centers. She detailed William Whitmore's coordination of political corruption, schemes that had influenced municipal contracts, judicial decisions, and regulatory enforcement. Each revelation was supported by recordings, financial documents, and surveillance evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic criminal activity. The defense attorney's attempts to discredit Maya's testimony focused on the personal betrayal involved in her marriage to David, arguing that her willingness to deceive her husband demonstrated a fundamental dishonesty that should undermine confidence in her professional credibility. But Maya's responses revealed the psychological complexity of deep cover operations in ways that educated the jury about the personal costs of federal law enforcement work. The Bureau's protocols require agents to maintain operational security, even when it conflicts with personal relationships, Maya explained, her voice carrying the weight of difficult choices that had defined her professional life. My marriage to David Whitmore was genuine, but my primary obligation was to complete an investigation that would protect the public from ongoing criminal activities. The decision to maintain my cover despite personal complications was approved by federal supervisors who recognized the unique intelligence value of my position within Charleston's social hierarchy. David's presence in the courtroom's gallery created an emotional undercurrent that complicated every aspect of Maya's testimony. Their divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier, a legal formality that couldn't adequately address the emotional complexity of ending a relationship built on both genuine love and professional deception. David had ultimately chosen to support the federal prosecution of his family members, but the personal cost of Maya's betrayal had made reconciliation impossible despite his intellectual understanding of her professional obligations. Maya's testimony revealed financial details that demonstrated the scope of the criminal conspiracy in ways that traditional surveillance had never been able to establish. The charity auctions that Patricia had organized with such social fanfare were revealed as sophisticated money laundering operations where inflated art purchases created paper trails for criminal proceeds. The educational grants that had supported David's nonprofit work were traced to offshore accounts funded through political corruption and organized crime activities. The psychological impact of Maya's testimony extended beyond the specific criminal charges to challenge fundamental assumptions about social class, respectability, and moral authority that had shaped Charleston's cultural identity for generations. The revelation that federal agents could maintain deep cover identities within the city's most exclusive social circles created paranoia about the true identities of other community members whose backgrounds might not withstand federal scrutiny. Federal prosecutors presented evidence that Maya's 3-year operation had identified criminal activities involving 47 individuals, including 2 federal judges, the mayor and 3 city council members, 6 bank presidents, and dozens of business leaders whose charitable work had provided cover for systematic fraud. The network of corruption had operated with such sophistication that traditional law enforcement methods had been unable to penetrate its protective layers of social respectability and legal camouflage. Maya's handler, Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, testified about the unprecedented success of the Charleston operation in ways that established Maya's work as a model for future deep cover investigations targeting white-collar crime networks. Agent Castellanos demonstrated exceptional operational discipline while gathering intelligence that exceeded our most optimistic projections, Morrison told the court. Her ability to maintain cover while documenting complex criminal conspiracies represents a significant advancement in federal law enforcement capabilities. The sentences handed down by federal Judge Catherine Reynolds reflected the severity of crimes that had operated under the guise of charitable work and social prominence. Patricia Whitmore received 22 years in federal prison for money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud charges that had diverted millions of dollars from legitimate charitable purposes. William Whitmore was sentenced to 18 years for his coordination of political corruption schemes that had undermined democratic processes while enriching criminal conspirators. Maya's transition back to her authentic identity required extensive psychological counseling provided by FBI specialists who understood the unique challenges faced by agents completing long-term deep cover assignments. The process of reclaiming her true personality after 3 years of carefully constructed deception involved rebuilding confidence in her own judgment, processing the grief associated with lost relationships, and developing new professional goals. That incorporated lessons learned from the Charleston operation. The Bureau promoted Maya to senior special agent and assigned her to lead a new task force focused on investigating charitable fraud and nonprofit corruption throughout the Southeast. Her expertise in penetrating elite social circles made her invaluable for operations targeting criminal networks that used philanthropic activities as cover for illegal enterprises. The Charleston case had established precedents for investigating organized crime that operated through legitimate institutions rather than traditional criminal enterprises. Maya's new position included responsibility for training other agents in deep cover techniques, sharing psychological strategies for maintaining false identities over extended periods, and developing protocols for protecting agent welfare during assignments that required personal sacrifice for professional success. Her experience with the emotional costs of deception informed FBI policies designed to provide better support for agents working undercover assignments that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity and loyalty. The elementary school where Maya had taught during her cover assignment established a scholarship fund in honor of her service, recognizing that her dedication to her students had been genuine despite the false premises of her presence in their lives. Former colleagues and parents who had appreciated her teaching abilities learned that her patience, intelligence, and commitment to education had been authentic qualities that transcended her professional deception. David eventually remarried and relocated to Atlanta, where he continued his educational reform work with a nonprofit that maintained strict protocols for verifying donor backgrounds and funding sources. His experience with his family's criminal activities had informed his understanding of how charitable organizations could be compromised by well-intentioned leaders who failed to adequately investigate their supporters' true motivations. Maya's personal relationships remained complicated by the psychological impact of maintaining false identities for extended periods. Dating required navigating potential partners' concerns about her profession and their ability to trust someone trained in deception. But she gradually built friendships with other federal agents who understood the unique challenges of law enforcement work that required personal sacrifice for public safety. The Charleston investigation established Maya as one of the Bureau's most effective undercover operatives, leading to invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences and contribute to academic research about white-collar crime investigation techniques. Her work demonstrated that criminal networks operating through social institutions required different investigative approaches than traditional organized crime, emphasizing the importance of cultural intelligence and social penetration capabilities. 5 years after the Riverside Country Club arrests, Maya received the Federal Bureau of Investigation's highest honor for distinguished service, recognizing her Charleston operation as a watershed moment in white-collar crime investigation. The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., attended by federal law enforcement leaders who praised her work as a model for future operations targeting corruption that hid behind social respectability. Maya's acceptance speech reflected on the personal costs and professional rewards of deep cover work in ways that educated audiences about the human dimension of federal law enforcement. The Charleston operation succeeded because it combined traditional investigative techniques with cultural penetration that allowed us to observe criminal behavior in settings where perpetrators believed they were safe from scrutiny, she told the assembled law enforcement officials. But the success came at personal costs that remind us why this work requires agents who are willing to sacrifice individual happiness for collective security. The transformation from the dismissed daughter-in-law who had endured Patricia Whitmore's condescension to the federal agent receiving national recognition for distinguished service represented more than professional advancement. It symbolized the triumph of authentic identity over social performance, the victory of substance over appearance, and the vindication of someone who had been systematically underestimated by people who confused social position with actual worth. Maya's story became a case study taught at the FBI Academy, demonstrating how effective undercover operations could dismantle criminal networks that traditional surveillance methods couldn't penetrate. Her techniques for maintaining psychological stability during extended deception assignments informed training protocols that better prepared agents for the emotional challenges of deep cover work. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Maya's transformation was her recognition that the qualities Patricia Whitmore had dismissed as inadequate for proper society were actually the strengths that had made her an exceptional federal agent. Her ability to listen carefully, observe social dynamics, and maintain composure under pressure weren't signs of intellectual limitation. They were professional skills that had enabled her to succeed where more traditional approaches had failed. The woman who had once served champagne to Charleston's criminal elite while enduring their condescension had become the federal agent whose testimony sent dozens of them to prison, transforming from victim to victor through the simple act of revealing her true identity and speaking the truth about crimes that had operated in plain sight for decades. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.